Welcome to the Haunting Rose. In today's chilling video, we bring you 3 spine-tingling tales of MadamKoiKoi, the legendary ghost who haunts boarding schools with the eerie click of her high heels. Each story delves into her haunting origins, terrifying encounters, and the restless spirit that keeps her roaming the halls. Brace yourself for a night of suspense and fear. Before we dive in, please click the subscribe button and share, as our goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers in a month. Now, let's step into the shadows together. There are some memories that claw at the corners of your mind, refusing to fade, no matter how hard you try to bury them. For me, it all began during my first term at Graceland Girls Academy, a boarding school in Lagos. I'd heard whispers of MadamKoiKoi long before stepping foot in the school. The ghostly apparition of a woman who haunted boarding schools, her presence heralded by the distinct click of high-heeled shoes. Like most urban legends, I assumed it was just a tale meant to scare new students into behaving. But I was wrong. Graceland Girls Academy was an imposing structure, its high walls and wrought iron gates a stark contrast to the bustling streets of Lagos outside. The dormitories were old, their creaking wooden floors and peeling paint adding to the school's eerie charm. My first few weeks were uneventful. I made friends, adjusted to the routine, and learned to navigate the labyrinthine hallways of the main building. But then, strange things started happening. It began with whispers. Late at night, when the dorm was silent and everyone was supposed to be asleep, I'd hear faint murmurs, like someone calling a name. At first, I thought it was just one of the girls talking in her sleep, but the whispers always seemed to come from the hallway outside our dorm room. One night, I decided to investigate. Clutching my flashlight, I tiptoed to the door, careful not to wake the others. As I opened it, a cold draft swept in, raising goosebumps on my skin. The hallway was empty, the flickering light bulb casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I shone my flashlight down the corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response, just the oppressive silence and the faint hum of the generator in the distance. I was about to turn back when I heard it. The unmistakable click-clack of high-heeled shoes echoing down the hallway. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was slow, deliberate, and growing louder. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a soft, sorrowful voice whispered, "Have you seen my daughter?" I didn't wait to find out who it was. I turned and bolted back to my bed, diving under the covers and squeezing my eyes shut. I didn't sleep that night, my mind replaying the chilling encounter over and over. The next morning, I confided in my roommate Tola. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each word. "You heard her," she said quietly. "Heard who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "MadamKoiKoi." Tola explained the legend as she had heard it. Years ago, a devoted mother was on her way to pick up her daughter from boarding school at the end of term. She was running late and sped down a treacherous road, desperate to reunite with her child. Tragically, she was involved in a fatal accident and never made it to the school. Her daughter, heartbroken and unaware of the tragedy, waited for days, believing her mother would come. Consumed by grief, she fell ill and passed away in her dormitory. The mother's spirit, overwhelmed by guilt and an unfulfilled promise, began haunting boarding schools. "She's always searching for her daughter," Tola explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if she mistakes you for her child, she might take you with her." I tried to put the incident behind me, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the strange occurrences only escalated. Books would fall off shelves for no reason. Girls reported seeing shadows move across the walls when no one was there. And always, there was the sound of high heels clicking in the distance. One particularly chilling night, I was woken by a loud bang. The dormitory door had swung open, though there was no wind. I sat up, heart racing, and saw a figure standing in the doorway. She was shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the outline of a woman in a long dress. In her hand, she held a small, weathered suitcase. "Have you seen my daughter?" she asked, her voice dripping with sorrow. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The room was deathly silent, the other girls seemingly frozen in time. The woman stepped into the room, her high heels clicking against the wooden floor. She moved from bed to bed, her mournful eyes scanning each face. When she reached mine, she paused. Her gaze bore into me, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness, as if her grief was seeping into my very soul. "You look just like her," she whispered, reaching out a hand. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and the sun was streaming through the windows. The other girls claimed they hadn't seen or heard anything, but their pale faces and hushed voices told me they were just as terrified as I was. Over the weeks that followed, I became obsessed with finding out more about MadamKoiKoi. I combed through old records in the school library, searching for any mention of the tragic mother and her daughter. What I found sent chills down my spine. Decades ago, there had been a student named Amaka whose mother had died in a car accident on her way to pick her up. Amaka had fallen gravely ill shortly after and passed away in the school's infirmary. The details matched the legend almost perfectly, but there was one detail that hadn't been mentioned in the stories. Amaka's mother had been wearing high heels the day she died. The same heels, according to witnesses, that had been found lying in the wreckage of her car. The final encounter happened on the last night of the term. I had been packing my things, eager to leave the school and never return. The dormitory was unusually quiet, the other girls already asleep. As I zipped up my suitcase, I heard it again, koi koi. The sound was louder this time, more insistent. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. My breath came out in visible puffs as I turned to face the doorway. She was there, her figure bathed in an eerie, unnatural glow. This time, I could see her face clearly. It was pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken, but filled with an unbearable sadness. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "help me find my daughter." I don't know what came over me, but I found myself stepping forward. "She's gone," I said, my voice trembling. "She's not here anymore." Her expression crumpled, and she let out a wail that shook the walls. The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. When they came back on, she was gone. I left Graceland Girls Academy the next day and never looked back. But even now, years later, I can't escape her. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the sound of high heels echoing in the distance, and I wonder if she's still searching, her restless spirit unable to move on. I never believed in ghost stories, not even the ones whispered in terrified tones late at night when the power cut out and the shadows grew taller. I thought the tales were mere fabrications, stories conjured to keep students obedient or entertained. That was before I transferred to St. Catherine's boarding school in Lagos, a place where the echoes of the past seemed to lurk around every corner. It began with the whispers. "Have you heard about MadamKoiKoi?" whispered Ada, my bunkmate, on the second night of my stay. "Who?" I asked, feigning disinterest but leaning closer. Ada's eyes darted nervously toward the door, as if expecting the very name to summon her. She was a teacher here. Cruel, vain, always wearing red high heels. She died years ago. but they say she never left. Why would she haunt the school? I asked, skeptical. Ada shrugged. Some say she wants revenge. Others believe she misses her shoes. She chuckled nervously, but the look in her eyes betrayed genuine fear. If you hear the sound of high heels clicking in the halls at night, don't look. Don't even breathe. Just pray she passes by. I laughed it off then, but that laugh died the first time I heard the haunting, rhythmic koi-koi echoing down the corridor. It happened on a moonless night, the kind that seemed to swallow light and sound. The power had gone out earlier, plunging the dormitory into darkness. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft snores of my classmates. The silence was thick, oppressive. Then, faintly at first, I heard it koi-koi, the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking against the tiles. My heart leapt to my throat. Surely, it was just a senior playing a prank. I closed my eyes and tried to convince myself that there was nothing to fear. But the sound grew louder, closer. Koi-koi, koi-koi. Each step echoed in the stillness, deliberate and unhurried. I turned to Ada's bunk. Her face was buried under her blanket, her body trembling. The sound stopped outside our dormitory door. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The handle jiggled, and the door creaked open. I held my breath as the clicking resumed, now inside the room. Koi-koi, koi-koi. The footsteps moved between the rows of bunks, pausing at intervals as if surveying each bed. My muscles tensed as they drew closer to mine. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying silently, my pulse thundering in my ears. The footsteps stopped. I could feel a presence looming over me, the air around me growing colder. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then a soft, chilling voice whispered, "Where are my shoes?" I didn't dare move. Seconds passed like hours before the footsteps resumed, retreating toward the door. When they finally faded away, I exhaled shakily, tears streaming down my face. The next morning, Ada and I exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. The rest of the girls went about their routines as if nothing had happened, but I noticed their nervous glances at the dormitory door and the way they avoided speaking MadamKoiKoi's name. That day, I decided to learn more about the legend. During lunch, I cornered Chinyere, one of the seniors who seemed to know everything about the school's history. "Tell me about MadamKoiKoi," I demanded. Chinyere's expression darkened. "Why do you want to know?" "I heard something last night," I confessed. The sound of high heels. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in closer. MadamKoiKoi was a teacher here many years ago. She was beautiful but cruel. She would slap students for the smallest mistakes and ridicule them in front of their peers. Her one vanity was her red high heels. She wore them every day, strutting through the halls as if she owned the place. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. One day, a group of students decided they'd had enough. They stole her shoes and hid them. When she found out, she flew into a rage. She slapped one of the girls so hard that she fell and hit her head on the corner of a desk. The girl died instantly. The other students panicked and turned on MadamKoiKoi. They attacked her, beating her until she was unrecognizable. Then they dumped her body in the bush behind the school. I shuddered. "And now she haunts the school." Chinyere nodded gravely. "She's looking for her shoes. And for revenge." That night, I couldn't sleep. The darkness felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. Every creak of the building made my heart race. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. When I heard it again, koi-koi. The sound was fainter this time, as if coming from a distance. But it was unmistakable. I sat up in bed, my curiosity outweighing my fear. I needed to see her, to confirm that this wasn't just my imagination. Grabbing a flashlight, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed toward the door. Don't, Ada hissed, grabbing my arm. Don't go. I have to, I whispered back. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. If you see her, she'll never leave you alone. I hesitated, but the sound of footsteps growing louder spurred me on. I pulled free of Ada's grasp and stepped into the hallway. The air was icy, each breath forming a visible puff in the beam of my flashlight. The sound of high heels echoed through the corridor, leading toward the main hall. I followed cautiously, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped abruptly. I swung the flashlight beam ahead and froze. There she was. A woman stood at the end of the hallway, her back to me. She wore a tattered, blood-stained blouse and a skirt that swayed as if caught in an unseen breeze. Her feet were bare, but in her hand, she held a single red high heel. Slowly, she turned to face me. Her face was a nightmare. One I was missing, the socket dark and hollow. The other burned with an unnatural red light. Her lips were cracked, twisted into a malicious smile. Blood streaked her face, and her other hand clutched at her throat, where a deep gash still oozed. "Where are my shoes?" she rasped, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. Darkness enveloped me, and I heard her footsteps approaching. "Koi-koi! Koi-koi!" I turned and ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold tiles. Behind me, her laughter echoed, chilling and triumphant. "You can't run from me," she taunted. I burst into the dormitory and slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it. The other girls were awake now, their terrified faces illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the windows. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and for a moment there was silence. Then a single knock. "Let me in," she whispered. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Minutes passed before the knocking ceased. When we finally dared to open the door, the hallway was empty, but scratched into the wood, in jagged letters, were the words, "I will be back." I left St. Catherine's boarding school the following term, unable to endure the fear any longer. But even now, years later, I still hear the sound of high heels clicking in the dead of night. Koi-koi! Koi-koi! I know she's still looking for me, and one day, she'll find me. I still remember the first time I heard the name MadamKoiKoi. It was whispered in hushed tones during a late-night storytelling session in our dormitory at Kingsway Secondary School, Lagos. The girls huddled together on one bed, the faint glow of a flashlight illuminating their wide-eyed faces. It was my first term as a boarder, and I was still adjusting to the strange rhythms of dormitory life. I had laughed off their stories, dismissing them as childish attempts to scare each other. But deep down, a chill had settled in my bones, and now I know why. The first time I heard her footsteps, I was alone in the library. It was a rainy evening, and most of the students were either in their dorms or the dining hall. I'd stayed back to finish an assignment, the soft patter of rain against the windows providing a soothing backdrop. Then faintly I heard it, koi-koi, the sharp, deliberate sound of high heels clicking against the tiled floor. At first, I thought it was a teacher, perhaps Miss Ebra, the strict English teacher who always wore heels. But as the sound grew louder, closer, I realized it didn't have the hurried pace of a staff member. It was slow, measured, and unnervingly deliberate. I froze, my pen hovering above my notebook. The footsteps stopped just outside the library door. I held my breath, straining to hear. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air swept in. I turned my head, expecting to see someone, but the doorway was empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response. I stood up, gathering my books quickly. and bolted for the door. As I stepped into the corridor, I glanced back. The library was dark, the door swinging gently on its hinges. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd heard. I convinced myself it was my imagination, fueled by the stories I'd overheard. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until weeks later that I heard the full story of MadamKoiKoi. It was Ada's turn to tell a ghost story, and she had a reputation for making even the most skeptical among us shiver. She wasn't always a ghost, Ada began, her voice low and conspiratorial. MadamKoiKoi was once a student, just like us. Her name was Iphioma, and she was the most beautiful girl in school. Everyone adored her, but she made a mistake. She fell in love with the wrong person. "Who?" someone whispered, leaning in closer. "Chike," Ada said, her tone dark. "The senior prefect. He was charming, handsome, and he knew it." Iphioma was smitten, and for a while, they were the perfect couple. But Chike wasn't who he seemed to be. He was cruel, manipulative. He'd made a bet with his friends that he could get Iphioma to fall for him. And on the night of the final year dance, he planned to humiliate her. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. That night, Ada continued, Chike and his friends lured Iphioma to an empty classroom. They told her it was a surprise, but what they did to her. She paused, her voice shaking. They hurt her, and when she tried to escape, they chased her to the rooftop. In the struggle, she fell, or maybe they pushed her. Nobody knows for sure, but she died that night, her blood staining the school grounds. The teachers tried to cover it up, saying it was an accident, but Iphioma's spirit couldn't rest. They say she's still looking for Chike and his friends, and if you hear her footsteps, it means she's close. "What about the shoes?" someone asked. Ada's eyes gleamed. They say she loved high heels. She wore them everywhere, even when they didn't match her uniform. The sound of her heels was so distinct that it became her signature. That's why they call her MadamKoiKoi. I tried to brush off Ada's story as just that, a story. But after that night, the atmosphere in the school felt heavier. Whispers of strange occurrences spread. A girl's mirror shattering without cause, cold drafts in the middle of summer, and of course, the unmistakable Koikoi echoing through the halls. My own encounters became more frequent. I would hear footsteps at odd hours, sometimes outside my dorm, sometimes in the bathroom. Once, I saw a shadow pass beneath the door of the common room, but when I opened it, no one was there. Each incident chipped away at my skepticism, replacing it with mounting dread. Then came the night I couldn't ignore. It was a few weeks before the end of term. The power had gone out during prep, plunging the entire school into darkness. We lit candles and tried to continue studying, but the flickering light only heightened our anxiety. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was the girls in the next bunk, but as I sat up, I realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the room. It was outside, in the corridor, and beneath the whispers was another sound, Koikoi. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside our door. The whispers ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. Then a soft knock. "Who's there?" One of the girls whispered, her voice trembling. There was no response. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air swept in, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, I felt a presence, heavy and oppressive. The air grew icy, and I could hear the faint rustle of fabric, as if someone were moving among us. A scream pierced the silence, and the room erupted into chaos. Girls scrambled for the door, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. I was pushed to the ground, my head striking the corner of a bedpost. Dazed, I lay there as the room emptied. When I opened my eyes, she was there. She stood at the foot of my bed, her figure illuminated by an otherworldly glow. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She wore a torn evening dress, the hem stained with blood. In one hand, she held a single red high heel. "Where is he?" she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. I couldn't speak. My throat felt paralyzed, my body frozen with terror. She leaned closer, her face inches from mine. Her breath was cold, smelling of decay. "Where is he?" she repeated, louder this time. I managed to shake my head, tears streaming down my face. Her expression twisted with rage, and she let out a scream that seemed to shake the very walls. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The school closed early that term, citing electrical issues and structural repairs. But we all knew the truth. MadamKoiKoi's presence had grown too strong to ignore. I never returned to Kingsway. My parents transferred me to another school, far away from Lagos. But even now, years later, I can't escape her. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the sound of high heels echoing through the halls of my mind. Koikoi, Koikoi. And I know she's still searching for those who wronged her. Or maybe she's searching for me. Thank you for listening to The Haunting Rose, where dark tales find their bloom. If you have a story you'd like me to share, I'd love to hear it. Reach out to me via the email in the video description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support keeps these haunting stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and let the shadows guide you.